Elphinstone Station stampede disaster, indifference, callousness and lack of accountability have been the root cause. How should be the dimension planning of crowded areas so as to avoid stampedes? How should be the crowd management during the confluence of event, space and time? After systematic planning, how should crowd be monitored? GS Paper 3, Disaster Management. What is the context about? It was a tragedy waiting to happen. On Friday, 22 people lost their lives in a stampede on the stairs leading out of Elphinstone Road station in the heart of Mumbai. The city's suburban railway carries 8 million people, equivalent to Switzerland's population, daily. Stampedes on rail platforms and religious gatherings aren't uncommon in the country with a population of more than 1.3 billion. Eyewitnesses said a crowd of several hundred commuters gathered on a narrow footbridge to seek cover from the rain during the morning rush hour. How should be the dimension planning of crowded areas so as to avoid stampedes? The first step is to plan. 3 dimensions need to be considered: the spatial, temporal and the event-related, or a confluence of place, time and event. If any space, say, a cricket ground, is required to host a crowd, then it first needs to be studied. Next, if at any point of time a sudden surge of activity is anticipated, then additional planning is needed. Third, if there is a specific event happening in that space-time context, this will imply extra attention. Of course, sudden, unforeseen emergencies, like a fire, can also trigger unfortunate incidents. Even if such incidents can't be predicted, they should always be anticipated and prepared for. Administrators should understand all 3 dimensions of crowd management. How should be the crowd management during the confluence of event, space and time? Important aspect of crowd management is flow regulation. On normal days, one would expect crowds to be distributed randomly, peaking perhaps twice or thrice. However, during the confluence of event, space and time, there may be a sudden, sharp peak. Even if arrivals follow the famous bell or normal distribution curve, the curve may have a narrow base and a sharp peak, sudden increase in arrivals. Therefore, flattening this curve by regulating the rate at which the crowd builds up can be achieved through controlling crowd flow at the entry and exit points. If, in a continuous flow process, monitoring the flow and keeping check on how it's being exceeded is not possible, a system can be created whereby people can be allowed in batches of fixed numbers. Again, like in an assembly line, balancing is important. Every stage of flow should roughly take an equal amount of time to negotiate, or we will have queues building up at some stages, which will become bottlenecks. After systematic planning, how should crowd be monitored? Even if planning is done well, systematic and meticulous monitoring is important. The feedback received through monitoring can help regulate the system. If, at some point, outflow doesn't happen at the planned rate, the control room should, through some mechanism, say CCTV, check the reason and immediately act to decongest and restore the flow. Those who are part of the crowd, or a traffic jam, will never know where the bottleneck is. Only someone outside the system, but monitoring it closely, will be able to recognize this and act immediately. Regulation will include controlling flows at entry and exit points, decongestion and removing bottlenecks along flow paths and resorting to transfers to temporary buffer spaces, if necessary.